Welcome back to the 6:30 CHED Afternoon News. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. And now we've made a couple of guests in studio part of our day. Jalen and I, Andrew Gross, we're joined now because it's the last Wednesday of the month by Dr. Ganz Ferrance. And Dr. Ganz, you've brought in a guest. Can you introduce your guest for us?
Absolutely. I'm really happy that Deringer is here with me, and I'll let her talk about herself a little bit so that the listeners get to know her.
Well, Kara, we're going to talk about kind of confrontations and challenges in the workplace, and this is something that you specialize in.
It is, yeah.
No, what do you do exactly?
What do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a mediator and a facilitator, worked in federal government for a number of years, and basically assisted employees and managers in working through their challenges in the workplace.
Okay, so when we talk, Dr. Ganz, when we start talking about, oh boy, we could be here. We say this every time Dr. Ganz is in. We could do this for hours. So when we're talking about confrontations in the workplace, from one extreme to the next, you know, what do you classify confrontation in the workplace as? Well,
it can be anything from like screaming at your boss or your boss screaming at you, or coworkers fighting, to even that, like the what you think of as schoolyard bullying almost, right? Excluding people, or, you know, not inviting people to lunch. You know, there's lots of ways to make a workplace uncomfortable for somebody and to create conflict. And it's, you know, we spend half of our waking lives, a third of our lives at work, typically.
Not me.
Not him.
Well, you sleep at work.
Yeah.
Okay. But, you know, it's a really, really important thing in terms of quality of life to have a pleasant place to be when you're spending that much time there.
Okay, but before we get right into it, to the nuts and bolts of the whole thing, we don't have to like the people we work with, do we?
You might not have to like them, like, you know, want to take them out for lunch all the time, but I think it's important to have at least a respect and a professional way of working together.
But not to put too fine a point to it, but in your examples, you said, you know, for example, a guy doesn't get invited to lunch. So what? Now I have to invite people to lunch I don't like?
Well, okay, so if he's or she is being purposely and consistently excluded, that's a problem, because it's like the invisibility game that we play, or we used to play, or people used to play with us when we were little. You know, oh, this person doesn't exist. We're not going to talk to them. We're not going to look at them. Those things are very, very damaging to a person's well-being and their sense of self. And yeah, it can cause a lot of stress, depression, all sorts of stuff in the workplace. So no, you don't have to like everybody. You don't have to hang out with everybody you work with. But I think it is important to strive for inclusiveness. That's the best thing I could say about
So, and I would assume that productivity then suffers in the business because you've got somebody who's not happy.
Oh, yeah.
But I have to ask, Kara, if you said you're in resolution, so if I come to you in whatever department and say, well, my biggest problem is nobody ever invites me to lunch.
Right.
I mean, does that strike you as a legitimate complaint?
Well, I mean, definitely I've not heard that specific complaint, but there's always more to the story, right? People come forward with the tip of the iceberg in a conflict situation, and the challenge is exactly like you said, Dr. Ganz, is so many people, we spend so much time at work, we take that stress and that conflict home. You know, we want to be role models for our kids, and, you know, and we're taking that baggage home. It doesn't work at all.
Workplace bullying. We talk about that. I've been witness to it. I worked in a place for a very, very long time. That what I saw was absolutely mind blowing. What some people got away with, or what one person got away with, and the way that they made that place that I worked feel, how it made it run, all of those sorts of things. It is more common, I would suspect, than what we actually think.
Oh, it's everywhere for sure.
Really?
Yeah. It's a really big problem. You think about it, you know, Andrew mentioned productivity, but you know, you go into a place where somebody's got their face, you know, that kind of that ugly face, and you can feel the energy coming off of them. People are, your productivity, your feelings, your emotions, everything's going to come way down, and it does. You can actually measure these things on the bottom line. They you know, you measure it in terms of productivity, but also in terms of turnover, and that's, you know, training and hiring new people is ridiculously expensive. So you really want to build proper morale and a good working atmosphere, and whether it's a sports team or a business team or whatever, if you don't have a good working relationship, it's really difficult to go to work.
So where does that start then? Who is in charge of building that workplace morale? Is it the boss? Is it the leaders? Is it the GM? Is it the CEO?
I think it's everybody's responsibility. I mean, it's so easy for people to point the finger at the manager. I mean, that's the most common place to point the finger. And really, it's everyone's responsibility that if you've got one group going for lunch and not inviting one guy, right, they're actually perpetuating it. And I think some people do it, very few people do it intentionally, and a lot of people are just going about their day, you know, they're in their own world and sometimes forget what's going on for other people. So yeah.
See, I think things have really changed and made it more complicated. Back when I had a regular job, we would do one weekend a year, and it would be dressed up as we're going to bring you up to date on the newest technology in this industry, but then in the afternoon we're playing baseball, or we're doing something together socially, and the idea was all team building,
Absolutely.
right? But I think that's changed a little bit. I know companies still do those sort of things because I entertain at them, but with Facebook, with Twitter, with social media, the line has really become blurred as to when work begins and ends. And I think maybe, and I keep using this example of lunch, but and that's I'm putting a very fine point on it, but I think now what you're talking about though is I have to be involved in my company and be nice to my coworkers even after I've left the building. I don't, it's maybe not my fault, but it is my problem. I'll be judged if I'm not being a nice guy to people I work with.
Well, I don't know if you have to carry that much weight with it, though, honestly. I think, if you're kind and thoughtful and, compassionate at work, turn it off at 5 o'clock and go home. I mean, hopefully you take that attitude home to your family if you have one. But, no, I don't think you have to do all this other stuff. And it's not, the idea is not to put more weight on people in terms of, okay, now I got to do this now. They're not even paying me for this.
But that weight's there, right? Because these days, and not getting into the specifics of the conversation that you and I had just prior to going to air, but these days we live in a different world, right? So now I think many people are really worried that saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, telling the wrong joke, it feels like there's so many rules around us that people are almost to the point of paralyzed when it comes to dealing with coworkers. We're not really sure what's right anymore.
Right. My experience is you treat people like humans and you'll be okay, right? If you mess up and they know that your heart's in the right place, if you know you mess up, you go and apologize, and most people will deal with that appropriately,
I want to break it down a little bit. How do you deal with it then? I want to deal with it, if you're having conflict with your boss and you're feeling that is, a real trouble spot compared to having a conflict with someone who you share a cubicle with. If you're having a challenge with your boss, what do you do? I mean, they're the boss. We're afraid to oftentimes to go say, hey, you know what? I think what you're saying to me is inappropriate. It's not right. You're not treating me right. All that sorts of things. Where do you start?
Well, I think it's all in conversation, and it's authentic conversation. So I think one of the best places to start is really to be vulnerable and open and just share what's going on, and not, to set aside as much as possible the emotions that are going on and really focus on the facts and, setting aside the finger pointing and the blaming, and really just having a conversation to explore, if it's a particular event. How did you see the event go? How did they see the event go? There's a lot of people who think that they're in conflict with their managers, and their managers have no idea that they're in conflict.
Okay.
So you're saying specifically be that open and honest with your manager.
Absolutely.
Who may be at the heart of the problem.
Well, just to hear their perspective, right? We all often think that they're at the heart of the problem, and just like you say, Dr. Ganz, everybody's got a story. I always say people are doing the best they can with what they have, and for some reason what they did or said made sense to them at the time.
It can be very hard, though, to keep that deadpan. It can be very hard to not let those emotions bubble up.
Well,
Sure.
I tell you, though, one of the things that the biggest mistake I see people make, and this is in romantic relationships with their kids, as well as at the office, is we suck it up for too long. Okay, we try to be non-confrontational. We don't want to have the mess brought out, right? And so we suck it up, and we suck it up, and we suck it up. By the time we actually talk, we have to talk. It's bubbling out. It's coming out. And so there is no room to hold and have the deadpan and have the calm. It just kind of, you kind of go up and puke up your feelings on your boss or whatever, right?
How true is that? You go with a laundry list too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I've got his attention. Let's talk about the 5 other things.
And remember last year when you looked at me, right? And so it's a real problem because then you look like the crazy one,
right?
And you're not. You're actually the peacemaker. You want to have everything go smoothly and everything else like that, right? But because you sucked it up for so long, there's no more room to be calm. So one of the things I say to everybody in all relationships is, if something is bothering you and you can't truly let it go. Like if it's something minor, it's like, oh yeah, well, so-and-so was having a bad day, and you can let it go and it's not bugging you, you don't think about it, doesn't come back at you later, then that's fine. But anything short of that, it deserves a conversation.
All right, so we're talking about...
So if it keeps niggling at you, talk about it.
Talk about it, absolutely.
But... who do you talk about it with? Because I would think that's another problem as well. And I've observed in various organizations where people attempt to muster support for their position. They go to other coworkers and say, "What do you think of what that just?" Right? And you want to, because when you have that confrontation, you want to be able to go in and say, "I'm not the only one that thinks this."
Or worse, well, Sally told me she thinks you're a jerk, right? It's like you don't throw Sally under the bus. But no, look at. If you really want to know if your interpretation of the event is accurate and you're asking for that purpose, I think that's okay. But then you couch it that way. You set it up that way. Listen, I don't know. This and this happened. What do you think? And you don't have to be involved, but I just want some feedback from myself. That's different. But going and garnering support, no, that's garbage. Go talk to the person that bothered you. That's what it is. Listen, and what I'm saying is not for the weak of heart. It takes a lot of guts. But it works.
And when are
having those conversations? Sorry, Andrew. Having those conversations with anyone that you're in a relationship that you share any close quarters with, being truthful and honest can be very difficult.
Totally, it can be hard, but it's harder not to.
If I may just say from personal experience with you and Jaylyn, we agreed at the very beginning not to keep secret any problems. The smallest of problems, we'll just tell each other. We'll deal with it. We'll move on, and that has worked brilliantly.
It has worked very well, but I think, people work in different closeness and different proximity. Andrew and I are in here for 4 hours a day by ourselves, right? And if it's not working, it's not working, and it's going to be bad. But if Andrew and I were just sharing the cubicle over there, and he had a show, 2 hours before, I had a show 2 hours after, it would be different. But can you lay down, like Andrew and I have done, laid down the rules, those bases, they outline, okay, this is how we're going to handle if we have a conflict. This is how we're going to stay in communication. This is how we're going to talk. Is that a good idea to do?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's like in a family, every family has their own set of rules and expectations and kinds of conversations. I know with my kids, I look at it, my role is to coach them. So we have amazing conversations. But for sure, you can set that up with anyone. And I think one of the challenges in the workplace is that sometimes we do have this idea that we're just colleagues and we're just sharing space, we're just sharing the air. And if we choose to be open and have a relationship with people, set that up, set up a friendly conversation, set up some standards, some expectations, I think that's awesome.
So when you do your kind of work and do you do a follow-up? I mean, you leave, I assume, with a resolution. And by the way, I want to ask, how hard is that typically to come to? Because I'm trying to think of a good example that isn't us, but I can't.
Well, here's an idea. Why don't we take a break here? You come up with something, and I want to find out about how, when you go in to do mediating and conflict resolution, how you begin and how you end.
Sure.
Like, I can't even imagine. Yeah. Oh God, do you have video cameras in there and play that back? Isn't that the truth? My goodness. Thanks for your text at 630-630. If you have any questions for Dr. Ganz or Kara Deringer, who is mediation, what is your official title? Conflict negotiator.
Conflict management.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just let us know at 630-630. This one came in and it says, this is from Terry. It says, as a person who is in the midst of a complete breakdown at work for almost 2 years now, I can tell you that it is absolutely nothing short of hell, and mediation did absolutely nothing. I appreciate advice, but it doesn't always work. What happens if you do go and it doesn't work?
Well, there's definitely instances where mediation doesn't work. Like any conversation, two people need to be ready to have a conversation, to hear each other, and to come to a solution. And it sounds pie in the sky, especially when you're in the middle of something like that, where it sounds like it's really serious, and that's really what it is. I used to spend more time in mediation with people, and then over the years, I spent more and more time with people one-on-one, because a lot of it, I always say, I don't know what you think, but I'd say 95% of conflict is sorting out where you're at in a situation, how to articulate yourself and get through it. So it's a tough one, and no, mediation doesn't always work. There's lots going on in any situation, especially like that one.
Well, the bottom line is, when you have, like, if it's simple, it's two people, right? Sometimes it's more than two people, so it's really complex. But every time you have two personalities, each person brings their stuff to whatever the conflict is, whatever the mediation is. And so sometimes, you can be open and be ready to help and change and work it out. But if the other person's not, or if they're too emotionally invested in a position or whatever it is, no matter who is helping you, it's not going to work, right? And so, yeah, absolutely, one-on-one stuff is really necessary, because it only works if you're the right person to work it. Like, you know what I mean? You have to, all the parties have to be willing to look at it, sit down, and want a positive outcome. Some people really just want to punish each other.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about that. I'm thinking about these box stores. I'm thinking about corporate culture, and where the corporate culture wouldn't allow for or encourages conflict. And a good example would be a big box store that says, well, at the end of the month, we fire whatever salesman didn't, has sold the least.
Right.
Now you have some resolution you have to come to between two salesmen. Well, there's no hope of resolution there, because the culture of the company is not to be a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then what do you do?
Dog eat dog. Right? Yeah. Find another company if you can.
Well, that's what I was thinking from your texter there. I was just thinking, there has to come a point at which you have to make a decision that possibly I'm just in the wrong company.
Mm-hmm.
Or the wrong field, or the wrong marriage, or whatever.
Yeah,
right? Because look at the bottom line is, the better you feel, the better you do. So if you're in a crappy organization, or a bad team or whatever, you're not going to ever be able to fulfill your true potential in terms of what you're able to produce, or how high you're able to go, or any of that stuff, right? So it might be reasonable to look at, okay, if I take a step back from this, take a step down, but find a better situation that makes me happier, there's more potential for growth there. And at the very least, I'll be happier going to work every day. I'll probably sleep at night and not kick the cat when I go home.
It is 3:27 on the 6:30 CHED Afternoon News. We'll take a break here for the 3:30 News with Randy Kilburn. On the other side, we'll continue with How Does It Make You Feel with Dr. Ganz and Kara Deringer this afternoon. It is the last Wednesday of the month, and that means Dr. Ganz Ferrance joining us in the studio this afternoon for How Does That Make You Feel? And he brought a guest with us, with him as well today, Kara Deringer, who has a master's in conflict management, has been mediating and facilitating for years in the workplace. And boy, you could probably write about 3 books about some of the stuff that you have seen. This text came in, and I wanted to ask you about this. It says, this is namby-pamby in the industrial work world. You get canned for any small thing. The expense to fight wrongful dismissal, especially if unemployed, can be too much for the average Joe or Jane. So when we say sometimes about, well, go find another job, sometimes that is impossible. And that's just not realistic. So you have to find a way somehow to try to make it work. And where do you start?
That's a tough one. One of the things that I think works best is when you understand, okay, well, if this is the game I'm playing, how can I play it well? What do I need to do? And can I do it? Am I prepared to do it? Do I need to do it? So I'm not an advocate of violence, right? But I heard this great quote. This is an old
I want to know
sitcom.
what this is.
Yeah, me too.
So Soap. I don't know if
Yes,
some people might remember Soap, right? So the butler, can't remember his name, but anyway, somebody was threatening him one time. He's a very proper English gentleman. He says, oh no, please, I abhor violence. But then he said, but I'm very good at it. Right? So the idea here is, like, walk softly and carry a big stick. So like, if you're in a hostile place, or a place that's kind of in the texture's view, kind of rough, kind of tough, that sort of thing, then you got to be prepared to be rough and tough as well. So you can be kind, you can be thoughtful, you can be polite, but you got to be prepared to step into that if you need to. Because here's what I've known in my time of doing this is, when you're prepared to go to battle, you're fully prepared, you're all in, you rarely have to go to battle. But if you're not prepared, you're always going to end up fighting.
Well, I think
Interesting.
and you know, I sort of expected that we would get a text along those lines, and it's a legitimate point of view. But I think what people perhaps are confusing here, or I thought there was at least the risk of the confusion, is that we're not talking about, well, you know, every time somebody gives me a funny look, I'm going to ask for a resolution to that. I want to sit down with my manager, right? Those who have not been in a situation with workplace bullying or with really stressful work environments, toxic work environments, can't really understand, is that a fair comment, that just how hard it is? You just, I'm saying it like it happened to me, but it follows you home. It follows you into all aspects of your life. It affects your health. It causes your relationship with your children to suffer. We're not talking about bad looks in the workplace. Right. We're talking about prolonged conflict that needs to be resolved, right? You know, and it's I know where people are like, well, this mamby-pamby, the guy, I didn't like the way the guy handed me the wrench the other day or something. I'm talking about when the guy throws the wrench at your head, like, that's where it's gotten to. Now, we talked earlier about a scenario where the boss is the problem, and when you asked the question, I thought, well, that'd be the toughest thing to resolve. But then I got thinking as I listened to you two that would actually perhaps be the easiest thing to resolve, because he has the power to actually resolve it. What about a coworker to coworker? Do you start with the coworker, or do you start with the coworker supervisor?
My point on that is always go to the coworker for sure, because then actually both of you have the control. If you get your supervisor involved, all of a sudden three's a crowd. You've got another perspective in there. There's more power dynamics at play. It definitely makes it harder. So I think, the biggest thing we talked earlier about the tendency of people to go to coworkers and garner support. So to really avoid that, even avoid trying to bounce ideas off of a coworker, and, reach out to a friend who has, a solid head on their shoulders, and, who's not going to get you riled up and enrolled in your story, and basically just say, okay, I'm going to have this conversation. Help me out here. What's going to be helpful? I don't want this to be dramatic. What's going to be helpful? And really ask the person that you're talking with to set you up in a positive way, rather than get into the drama of it, so that you can have that conversation with them.
So easy to get into the drama of it all.
So easy.
Well, and this is where a good professional helps too, right? Like, this is somebody to bounce those ideas off, because they're not involved. They don't know the people playing, and they're the good ones will call you on your stuff. So they'll say, well, you know what? Did you ever think about it this way? Because it may be you're seeing it wrong, and it would be better to approach it this way than to say that, because that's going to get you in trouble.
The challenge being, though, and I can think, so okay, it's best to go to the person that you're having the difficulty with, but you're already having difficulties with them. You don't want to talk to them. You're not communicating well to start with. Where do you? And I'm always going back to the start. Where do you begin with that? Hey, listen, I feel that we're having a problem. Can we sit down and have a chat?
Absolutely. But like I said,
but that takes.
Yes.
You know what?
Yeah, it takes big ones, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, absolutely. But you know what? The cost of doing that, it takes some guts to do it, and you're risking a bit. But the cost of not doing it is so much more toxic for you, right? But listen, we have to work together. Let's try to work this out. I don't know how we got off to this position, but let's try to talk it through and deal with it. And if we can't, then let's go to the next level. Let's get somebody else in, like a mediator, like Kara or somebody, to come and help us. But if we can't resolve this, I'm not okay with being treated this way. And this is with the whole carry the big stick thing.
Yeah.
Because the next step for me is this action. I'm going to HR. I'm going to do whatever. But I don't want to do that. I'd rather work it out with you.
Yeah, that's a line that I know that I've used in the past, that number one, you're not allowed to speak to me that way, and number two, you're not allowed to treat me that way.
Yeah.
I've just
Absolutely.
But the concern I would have there is that we assume we're playing on a leveled field here because you're doing it the right way, but who's to suggest that they're going to do it the right way once the confrontation happens? If I say to you, Jaylyn, look, I'm having a problem with you. I'd really like to take a moment after the show. We can talk about it at a coffee shop if you like, get away from the building or whatever. And then you go out and tell everybody in the office that, Andrew's being
Andrew
whiny.
needs to talk to me again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but you know what? Here's the deal.
What do you mean again?
If you can hang in there, okay, I always believe that character always shows up, okay? And it might take a while, but if Jaylyn goes out there and tells everybody, but no one else knows you as being whiny or a troublemaker or whatever, then she's going to look like the idiot, not you, right? Especially if it happens over and over, and it's like, well, no, Andrew doesn't strike me that way. And then you call her on it. It's like, look, this, I came to you in good faith. This is what you did. Okay, so now we got a real problem. And now we got to take it to the next level.
And then how do you take it to the next level? How do you get involved? Because, again, just Jaylyn and I have no problems, folks, just so you know, not absolutely zero. But so I've had the conversation with Jaylyn. We haven't resolved it. We've suggested that we go to, say, CHED, our boss, and maybe take it up a level. I'm unsatisfied, or Jaylyn's unsatisfied with what the resolution is. What rights do I have? I mean, how do you get hired? How do I say to the boss, that's not good enough for me. I want a resolution expert in here. I want to talk to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, it really depends on the organization and how they're structured. So whether it's government, union, private, often there's an HR. I mean, the first line is usually the manager. And I always say, go to the person who's involved, then if need be, go to your manager, then go to HR or the union. But there's a lot of people who will go and jump the line, so they'll go straight to their union or they'll go straight to HR. And, my take on it is that just, you want to show a level of respect to the people involved to start out with. And so I think it's getting to know the organization and your options, and and like you said, have a plan A, have a plan B, and have a plan C, and make sure that you're taking care of yourself and you've got your boundaries established.
Can I ask you about passive-aggressive people?
Sure can.
What is that all about? and why, and how do you handle them? Is it one of those, oftentimes I find passive-aggressive people in the workplaces. I have in my 25 years of being on a job, I've dealt with passive-aggressive people on a regular basis, it seems. Why? What is that? Again, what is that all about? And do you call them on it?
And may I just say, Jaylyn,
it's not you, darling.
That's a great... I was just going to say, that's a great question for once.
Yeah. Oh, you're an artist.
Yeah, I know. So how do you deal with that?
Yes, you call them on it, right? Because the passive aggressive stuff is so hard to get your hands on. Do you know what I mean?
It's unreal.
Because of the backhanded comments, it's the little manipulation. It's, oh no, but I thought you just misunderstood what I had to say. Well, and so you really look at the behavior and you say, no, this behavior is not something I'm willing to have in my life. I'm not willing to tolerate this. This behavior is not appropriate.
Why do people do it?
Lack of confidence.
Is it a lack of confidence thing? That's what I was going to say.
Absolutely.
So with assertiveness, right? I've got some definitions. So when I do workshops, I talk about this actually. So assertiveness is, first of all, we're all responsible for our own needs. We're all responsible for making ourselves happy, being satisfied, being healthy. That's our responsibility. That's no one's responsibility, right? So an assertive person, a healthy person, is someone who takes that responsibility and does so in a way that does not stop anybody else from getting those needs met for themselves either. Actually, if they're really good at it, what they do is while they're meeting their own needs, they help other people meet their needs as well. Okay, that's an assertive person. An aggressive person is one who says, I'm going to meet my needs at your expense. And I'm going to take what I need and I don't care about you. Forget you, right? A passive person is someone who says, well, I'm going to let you get your needs met at my expense, and hopefully you're going to feel sorry enough or bad enough or guilty enough to meet my needs in the end. It never happens, by the way, so don't be passive, right? The passive-aggressive person is one that, they have the aggression, they're angry, they want to do stuff, and they haven't dealt with their own stuff, clearly. They're carrying around a lot of stuff. But they don't have the confidence to address it directly, to look after the needs directly. So they're still going to take from you. They're going to get their needs met at your expense, but they're going to do it in a way that's really manipulative or kind of that you can't. It's very hard to nail them down to be able to call them on it.
Well, I was just going to say, so Kara, that has to be the hardest resolution process ever if it's passive aggressive, because now you do sound, because by its own definition it's a body of work as opposed to a particular event. So now don't you sound like the crazy person when you walk in and say, well, on Monday he looked at me this way, and on Wednesday he didn't return my stapler, and you start to look like you're just not, you're the problem. And yet a long period of passive aggressive behavior can be very disruptive to the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we're talking about it off air too, how it really eats at you. It gets at you, and then it gets to the point where you don't even feel like yourself. Right? And so for sure, I mean, I'm always an advocate of be the bigger person. And again, I know some people see that as pie in the sky. Now, that being said, I worked with the RCMP for a number of years, so I worked in some tough cultures, right? But I always say be the bigger person. You know, there's the saying, kill them with kindness. I did that recently where someone was just being a jerk, and I gave them chocolates.
I find that works well on the texting line too, let me tell you. It's 3:49 on the 6:30 CHED Afternoon News. Just as we go to break an update, because I know we're getting texts about it on the baseball game, Toronto's up 8-0.
Awesome.
8-0, the top of the fifth. So we'll wrap up our conversation with Dr. Ganz and Kara Deringer after this. We've all just finished our group hug. That's awesome.
I noticed you just turned my mic on. I've been here for 5 years. I know how to turn a mic on.
Sometimes I wonder.
Just moving ahead, I'd like to turn my own mic on.
Pumpkin pie. See, that's what we've done.
That's right.
That's what we've done. We've had one of it, and we've told Dr. Ganz about this. When we have an issue going, or I have it in my relationship with my marriage, if I know that the conversation isn't getting anywhere, there's a word. We have a safe word.
Yeah, and ours is pumpkin pie.
And ours is pumpkin. Well, so is my husband's.
Oh, no, ours was zebra, wasn't it?
Ours was zebra.
That's how little we've used the tool.
Yeah. So, but you find ways to make things work. As we kind of wrap up this edition of How Does It Make You Feel, I always kind of like to end with this. What are your tips then? And from both of you, if someone is listening at work right now and they're staring over their desktop at that person that's driving them nuts or whatever it is, what are the tips to start to get a healthier workplace?
Well, I think tip number one is don't gossip. So don't gossip to people in the workplace about what's going on. Get the support that you need. Reach out to a friend or family member, but reach out to someone who's going to support you in a really logical, empowering way.
Yeah, I'd say address it early. Don't let it fester. The more you let it sit, the crazier you look when you actually address it. Right? And the harder it is to resolve. Right?
Whoa.
Yeah, and then the third thing I would say is be prepared to go to war. And that might sound really counterintuitive, but truly, if you are willing to go to whatever lengths you need to go to, and not violence, nothing illegal, right? To HR, to the boss, to look for another job, whatever it is that you need to do, if you're prepared to do that, it changes your energy when you go into that confrontation and that conflict, so that look, you know what, we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. I'd prefer the easy way, but I'm prepared to go the hard way too. And it changes the way things look.
But prepared to. I really like what you said earlier, that people try and skip the queue a little bit. HR is there for a reason, but they're not your first stop. Your first stop would be with the person you want to resolve the problem with.
Always go directly to the source. Yeah.
Just quickly, I want to make sure we have time to talk briefly about the conference coming up. But should you be friends with your coworkers on Facebook, social media? Your boss?
Depends on the workplace. Depends on the relationship. I'm all about authenticity. If it feels good, do it. And if it feels like an obligation, that's not authentic. Doesn't work.
Fair enough. Okay, so tell us about the conference that's coming up.
Yeah, so it's the People for People conference. It's happening October 5th and 6th, so that's next Monday and Tuesday. And we have a bunch of world-class speakers coming in: Sean DeParron, Bill Eddy, a bunch of local speakers. And this is an event that people would travel all over the world to attend. It's really speakers of that caliber. Dr. Ganz is one of our speakers.
Oh, look at you go. Hey.
And what exactly is it going to address?
I mean, who travels? Why do they travel around? What are they going to learn?
Yeah, perfect. So it's communication, conflict management, leadership, all the things we've been talking about. And a lot of our participants come and say, that it actually shifts them completely. They walk out of there with a whole new perspective on their work, on their business. It's for people. So HR professionals, psychologists, teachers, social workers, business owners, managers, leaders, anyone and everyone.
Nice. And how do people find out more information about it?
So the website is www.peopleforpeople.ca.
And always, Dr. Ganz has a new website.
That's right. It's drgans.com, DOCTOR.
Great advice, not
Ganz.
spelling. Not so much. Dr. Ganz, Kara, thank you both so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again next month.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.